I don't need a friend who changes when I change and who nods when I nod. My shadow does that much better. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Plutarch is well known as a prominent Greek philosopher, historian, and priest whose works influenced the evolution of writing for centuries to come. But he was also a politician. Over the course of his life, he was heavily involved in the politics of the Roman Empire. As a young man, he served as a magistrate, representing his hometown of Koronoa on missions in foreign countries. And later, he was elected as the archon, or chief magistrate of the municipality. Though his quote on friendship may originally have been an example of his moral philosophy, I believe that it is highly relevant to today's globalized political climate. Modern international politics is strongly based on alliances, not just in the military sense, but in terms of trade, economics, and shared values. And much like you can have toxic friendships, the alliances between countries can also be toxic. All too often, governments ignore when other countries commit inhumane or immoral acts simply because they wish to maintain good relations. My family is originally from Hungary, and under the government of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, Hungary has faced severe setbacks in its human rights and economy. Recently, his government banned the teaching of so-called LGBT propaganda from schools, and he has been repeatedly accused of homophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, corruption, misusing EU funds, and eliminating the free press and judicial independence of Hungary. However, though he has been condemned by the EU and human rights groups including Amnesty International, he has faced no real consequences for his actions. Unfortunately, this is far from the only such case of politicians receiving no consequences from the international community in response to their crimes. In 2018, Jamal Khashoggi, a journalist, an outspoken critic of the Saudi Arabian royal family, was assassinated at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. He had been lured to the consulate building on the pretext of receiving papers for his imminent wedding, only to be ambushed and dismembered by a team of 15 men. According to a Turkish source, one of the men, who had brought a bone saw, cut Khashoggi into pieces while he was still alive. They then took his butchered remains and dissolved them in acid. Investigations by both the United Nations and the CIA found that Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the murder. And yet, despite this tragic and despicable act, countries including the US, UK, France, Italy, and Canada continue to supply Saudi Arabia with billions of dollars worth of arms every year. In fact, US President Joe Biden personally defended the decision not to hold bin Salman accountable, citing the alliance between the two countries. This is unacceptable. We are in the transition stage between countries being largely independent and being part of a fully globalized society. And in order for this transition to be successful, international law must be upheld. Much like a good friend should be willing to disagree with us when we are wrong, countries should take a stance against the breaking of international law, even when it is committed by their own allies. This is especially important for countries like Australia. Here, we are extremely fortunate to not only be a wealthy nation with strong political ties, but to have a democratic government who, for the most part, represent the values and opinions of the people. Many countries cannot say the same. As such, it is the responsibility of countries like Australia to advocate for people around the world who are mistreated by their governments and to hold such governments accountable. This is the best way to ensure that the friendships countries have with each other support humanity as a whole. In the short term, it might raise tensions, but in the long term, I believe this will cause governments to to improve the lives of their citizens. Because after all, an alliance should not just be between the governments involved, but between the people these governments represent. We, as global citizens, need to speak out for our values. Because if enough people actually care about what is going on outside their own borders, politicians will have to listen, and we can push for a better world. Just as Plutarch wanted his friendships to be truthful and constructive, countries need to be critical allies who take a stand for what is right.